There we go. Corey, we're about to be live.
It
So
looks that way.
looks
It's
that
telling
way.
me I'm in the broadcast.
Excellent. Oh yeah, you are in the broadcast. Here we go. There it is, folks. All right, we are live. We are live right now on Facebook and across the internet. I'm hoping some of you pop in here as we are going. Friends, I'm going to tell you just a little bit about this, and then we're going to bring our guest immediately on. This is a new show that I wanted to start. You guys know I'm a big podcaster. I love podcasting. And I wanted to do more conversations, different kinds of conversations that were about things that my previous show, Halfway There, which I love, just didn't have space for certain things. And so I wanted to start a new show, and this is that show. We're live streaming. So if you are around and you're watching this across the internet, various platforms, I cannot wait for you to ask your questions. So one thing that I love to do is start conversations. And I want to start a conversation with you today about something that maybe is a little bit hard, right? So we're going to talk about politics and religion and how they relate to each other and all of that. So that is going to be very interesting. But let me just let you know that you get to be part of the conversation. So I'm going to bring on our guest here in just a second. I'm going to introduce him. But before I do that, let me tell you, you can actually ask a question. So in the comments, you see this live stream pretty much anywhere, you can ask a question and we'll be able to see your questions. And later in the show, we're going to answer them. So you might have a question about politics. Why does it work the way that it does? Or all these different things, whatever it is. How can we talk about religion? Whatever. That's all those kinds of things. Ask those questions. And we're going to get a chance to have some answers for you later on. Okay. So that's enough about me. We're going to have a great time. We have a guest today. I'm really excited to bring him on because I was telling him earlier, I don't think there's anybody else who like could encapsulate not only some of where I've been in the past, but some of what I want to kind of create with this show, because he's got a show called Talking Politics Without Killing One Another, right? Without killing each other.
Something like that.
Yeah. And it's so great. So our guest is Corey Nathan, and I am going to bring him on. Hey, Corey, welcome to the podcast. You also produce some other podcasts as well, right? So, which is great, but that's the one I know you for. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, it's good to be with you, Eric. How you doing?
I'm fantastic. I'm excited. I am ready to do this. I love having these kind of conversations, going deep, and we're going to get a chance to do that today and see what else is going on, right? Which I think will be fun.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
Corey, it's kind of a short intro for you, like you're the host of a podcast, but you're more than that. So we'll get into all of that. But tell me about before we get into the podcast, give me just a brief overview of kind of you and where you're at the moment. You doing good? Are you doing okay in the age of just like severe political division? Are you okay?
Yeah, no, every day's an adventure. Yeah, every day is a challenge to live out the virtues that we're trying to engender, with the program. And
Yeah.
I have to, the biggest caveat is that I don't do the program because I'm like the third degree black belt at what we espouse to do. I do it because I'm probably the one who's in need of the most. It's like the doctor. I'm not the doctor. I'm the patient kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So
Uh-huh.
Yeah, but it is a challenge, and it does seem like things can be can feel like they're getting more polarized,
Yep.
more bifurcated. But I'm also seeing, if you're looking in the right places, I'm also seeing what I think of as green shoots more and
Oh
more
yeah.
at all different levels, at institutional levels and formal levels, and less formal settings. A lot of the settings that I find myself in,
Yeah.
from the local pub to the church, the Bible studies to just city council meetings. I'm finding that there is a thirst for this, but folks aren't able to articulate it and aren't in the practice of doing it.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's where my head's at.
Well, I love that green shoots. So that's good, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit because I want to hear about some of those. But before we do, I'd like to hear about you and kind of learn about you and your background and kind of how that led you to the podcast that you're doing. Kind of this message that you have about listening to each other. Because you're an East Coast, you grew up in an East Coast Jewish family, New Jersey guy. So first question I got to ask: Springsteen or Bon Jovi?
Oh, dude. So first of all, so Bruce is from my actual hometown. In fact,
Really?
I
Okay.
think he graduated 22 years before I did. It would have been the same high school, but by the time I got there, it was 5 high schools. So he was in a big old high school by the
Wow.
time I got there,
All right.
a couple decades later. So I'm a big Bruce fan, but Bon Jovi was closer to my age. He was maybe, I don't know, he's maybe somewhere between 7 to 10 years older than me. But
Okay.
he went to the same roller skating rink that I went to.
Wow.
But my real guys, I don't know, this might be going deep cuts, but like
Yeah.
Blues Traveler,
Oh yeah.
Popper, Chant Angela, those are my guys. Like they were playing keggers in high school. I was a freshman when they were seniors, and they were
Okay.
playing keggers in our high school, and then up in Rutgers and around Princeton area, the bars up there. So those are my
Okay.
Bruce. His poetry. Sorry, this is a longer answer. You
Do it. No,
opened a
I love
can
it.
of
I love
worms.
it. Do it.
Yeah. Bruce, his poetry captures the ethos and the spirit of where we grew up. And there's something that is
Mm,
just eternal about his poetry. But what the rock and the rock and the roll and the everything, and the 5/4 time that everything about Blues
yep.
Traveler, that's much closer to my own tastes and my own experiences.
Oh, that's interesting. All right. Well, see, we learned something about you, right? You love the poetry of Springsteen, but you kind of like Blues Traveler better. That's interesting. To be honest, I haven't listened to a lot of Blues Traveler, but little Springsteen. But I'm a Bon Jovi guy, so that's all
Oh
right.
man, he gets all spiritual. I mean, talk about politics and religion.
Yes.
Listen to If you ever get a chance to read Popper's memoir. It's called, I think it's called "Suck and Blow" or something like that. It's a harmonica
Oh
player's
yeah.
phrase, but he definitely gets all spit. And if you read his lyrics, "Life I embrace you, I shall honor and disgrace you. Please forgive if I replace you," and
Wow.
it's all kinds of spiritual, not necessarily head on, kind of orthodox as we you know
Yeah.
deeply theological, but in his own way. I think he's asking big existential questions. We had him
Yeah.
on the show, actually. We had him on TPNR.
Did you really?
Yeah,
That's awesome.
yeah, that was great. It was awesome.
All right. Well, I'm going to ask you about some of your guests later, but we'll get into
Okay.
that. Okay. So here's where I wanted to start because I mentioned you and I talked about this extensively when you were on Halfway There, but
Yeah.
you talked to me about your Jewish family growing up and some of the things that you had, and we actually had this exchange where I told you, like, look, as a kid from Iowa, the only conceptualization that I had of kind of your family was from like TV, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But so describe that for us. What was it like growing up in that family in New Jersey, and like how, like, just you kind of set that a little bit maybe with some of the music, but set the tone. But give us an insight. Take us into that and kind of what it was like for you and what you remember.
So I will say you probably got a pretty good taste without realizing it of what a,
Which
at
is
least a slice
crazy.
of my life was like. Because like if you ever watched Everybody Loves Raymond, I'm absolutely convinced that they followed my mother Phyllis around for years and just
Yes.
recorded everything that she was character Marie based off of Phyllis. Um, so you think that, but they're a Catholic family. My family was Jewish, but it's There's a lot of similar. I guess you could say that Jews invented guilt and Catholics perfected it. There's a lot of similarities there. Um, but yeah,
Indeed.
my family's all from Brooklyn. By the time I was I think I was 6 years old when we moved to the Jersey side. But yeah, New York Jewish family, uh, and the family was everything. So every Sunday, my grandparents, we called them Baba and Zeta, which is Yiddish for grandmother, grandfather, Aunt Rhoda and Uncle Jerry came out. Small family, but very tightly knit, and celebrated all the holidays, observed all the holidays. We kept kosher in the house. We, it was like there's a lot of people you experience who, if they go to shul, if they go where they call it temple, but Orthodox, we call it either shul or synagogue. We weren't just, if they go, it's like once a year for Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. We went for everything. We went for Tish B'Av. We went for, we still to this day, we have the Seder at
Wow.
my house, even though I'm a Christian. We had Purim, we had everything.
Yeah.
So we were very, very kept kosher, very, very observant. So in 2000, I was in my late 20s when I went home to tell my dear old dad that I had become a Christian.
Yeah.
It went over great.
It went- right. Okay. So I know that conversation that you end up having with your dad really shapes you. And so I want to get to that. Before we do that, were there any other practices that you took away from, you mentioned all the different celebrations and things. Were there any other practices that you had as a kid that kind of shaped your ability to hold tension like you do now?
Hold tension. That's interesting. I do think that I had a connection with my father very early on, and he nurtured deep conversations. I think he enjoyed our deep conversations, even as a relatively little boy, like 7, 8 years old. For some reason, I was into ichthyology, partly because I knew how to spell it. I won the spelling bee on the word, but then I got into it, like the study of fish.
Oh.
So we went on these long drives, going to like far out fish stores and ponds and looking for these species of fish. And on those long drives, we'd end up getting into these deep conversations, some of which had to do with like what the Torah portion that we read that day, or that week, I should say. And even for a little boy, there's stuff that's more than just the cartoon version of the stories in Torah. There's, if you ever read Song of Solomon or Ecclesiastes, I can hear and start to think about what it means, what some of those meant for me as a unique person, as a unique, creation, God's creation, and grappling with that in the way that I wasn't a genius or anything, but I was an inquisitive little boy.
Yeah.
And my father really nurtured those conversations. I think also the big tables where all of us were sitting around, like the Seder I mentioned,
Yep.
just being able to hold space for all the different personalities. My mother had a certain kind of person, controlling, guilt's very much forward. My grandfather was a character. He was part Archie Bunker in the way he viewed the world, but he had a heart of gold, a real heart of gold, the most honest man you'd ever want to meet. My brother, I hope my brother doesn't listen to this. Well, if he does, he'll know what.
I hope he hops on and asks us a question. That'd be great.
Eddie definitely has a lot to say about everything.
Okay.
And I have a recording of the last Thanksgiving, actually the first Thanksgiving of 1993. It was right after I met Lisa, maybe within a month after I met Lisa, who I'm married to. This is 1993. And I have an audio recording of it. My brother is like 90% of the recording. It's like a 2-hour recording of my brother. So nothing changed from the time that I was born until like this day. Eddie has a lot to say, but it's a really like, you could definitely write a few sitcoms about it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know.
You said something that was really interesting.
It was an interesting.
Yeah. Which was that the family spaces, right, with the personalities. Do you think, because a lot's been written and talked about the family, the downfall of the family, right? The family's not as kind of central to American life. Do you think that has an effect on how we interact with each other? down the road?
I mean, my first thought is certainly, because if you're able to, in a way, be forced to be with each other and those different personalities, whether it's, the one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight of us, that's a relatively small family. It's me and my brother. My father had one sister. They had no kids. My mother was an only child. So just the eight of us all together, there were a lot of big personalities in that one room. So being able to know how to last at the table, whether it's just 1 hour for the meal at the Manalapan Diner in New Jersey,
Yep.
or at the Seder table where we're sitting there for 2-3 hours. You got to
Right.
be able to know how to navigate that, different personalities, different agendas, different allergies,
Yep.
and I think that helps prepare you to be around people that have different thoughts, different feelings, different beliefs than you do.
Right. Well, because sometimes, for lack of a better word, tolerating other people, right? Uh,
Yeah.
it involves a number of skills, right? Like sometimes it's just listening and not saying anything, right? That's kind of a valuable
Yeah.
thing. Some of us could learn. I don't, not me, but everybody else. Um, Sometimes it's being able to spar, right, and kind of give it back when
Yeah.
in the appropriate way, and so it can kind of go both directions. But those are skills that I think maybe we learn in family. That's interesting. I've never really thought about it that way before.
Here's another thing to think about. If there are a lot of there's a lot of medicines that are derived from plants, and homeopathic treatments that are scientifically viable. And if you think about plants, plants have deep roots, but they can't go anywhere. So they've developed, the reason that we're able to take certain oils, for example, from plants, is that they're rooted, and thus they can't escape certain attacks on their system. So they've developed pathogens, if you will,
Yep.
and we're able to derive the same thing. Similarly, if you take, I don't know, tea tree oil, for example, it helps with any number of itchy, skin or whatever. Similarly, if your family is kind of like where you're deeply rooted. So
Mm,
if you have deep enough roots, I'll just give you one example. What I'm finding is that it, in a lot of the conversations that we have on politics, there aren't moorings. There isn't, like, if you're setting your compass for what your actual political philosophy is, there isn't any true north except an anti-partisanship. Whatever he's for, I'm against. And that
right.
comes, I think, from a lack of being deeply rooted. If we have the roots of, this is right, this is wrong, this is what um, love feels like, this is
Mm,
what dysfunction feels like, and developing that sensibility from your roots, from a using a lot of different imagery here, well calibrated compass of things that are transcendent, that at least go across a couple of generations, if not a couple of millennia. Then if we don't have that, we don't have anything. Our feet are firmly planted in midair. I
right.
don't know. Does that make sense, or did I throw too many images at you at one time?
It's a cacophony of what do you call those metaphors? But that's okay.
Yeah, yeah.
It's just like your average worship song. It's fine. But that's definitely interesting. Yeah, I know. I think that's right, and so but that might be part of it, right? So people who are able to leave, or be separate from family, or we don't have that sort of same rootedness. The ability to travel is a blessing, but it's also has some consequences, right? And I think maybe perhaps
Mm.
we see that at the time. I think that's pretty interesting. Yeah, so you learn some things from your family by observing how to interact and learning how to interact with some big personalities. Um, I want to ask you. So in our first conversation, which, friends, I'll link to the where Corey tells me his story in my podcast halfway there, because we go in depth into your conversion and how all that happened. Um, but we talked a little bit about the relationships of the Pharisees to Jesus. Do you remember this? Like about how they had a uh, like you thought that they maybe we tend to think of them very negatively. The Pharisees are kind of the
Yeah.
boogeyman of the
Yeah.
New Testament, of the Gospels. Um, and you see it a little bit differently. So I want you to explain that to us, and so we could go into a little more detail. And then, how does that apply to our current situation?
Oh man. Okay. So how does it apply to our current situation? Well, if you look at Matthew 23, I think is probably where Jesus interacts with certain Pharisee, certain people who are Pharisees, and it gets the most heated.
Yeah.
Um, Den of vipers, I think is one of the expressions or something like that.
Yeah. Can
Um,
wait? So back up for just a second. So many of the people who will listen to me are Christians, and so they'll understand who the Pharisees are. But can you
yeah.
tell us who they are, and then tell us about their relationship? Because
Oh,
we got
sure.
to know that.
So
Yeah.
Pharisees were really rabbis. Pharisees were students. Pharisees were. It was like a group. There were a bunch of different groups that were trying to figure out, where are we, the people of Israel, in the arc of God's story, in the arc of history. The Essenes were one group. The Zealots
Mhm.
were another group. Then there were political groups and kind of hierarchical groups like the Sadducees, who were kind of running the temple and stuff like that. So there were a bunch of different groups. The Pharisees took Torah very seriously, and they were trying to understand, for example, like what they were trying to understand. Okay, the whole Mashiach, the whole Messiah thing. Like, when is Messiah going to come? How will we know when Messiah comes? Who will he be? From what tribe will he be? And they took these things, the word of God, very seriously. And the Pharisees were the ones who were working this out, not just among each other at that time, but across many generations. So between about 200 before Jesus and about 200 or so years after Jesus, they were working these things out that ultimately got written down in what we know now as the Talmud. And there's a part of the Talmud that's really cool. It's basically rabbis arguing with each other. So
Right.
they're like, well, this rabbi said this and he was right, but this rabbi said that and he's crazy. So and if you sit down at my Seder table, at my, at any
Yes.
dinner of the Nathan family, that's exactly what it sounds like. So
Right. But that
so
context is so important, because we actually get some insight into some of those conversations with Jesus, because the Pharisees will ask
yes,
Jesus about that. Hey, so if a woman dies and she's been married to all the seven brothers, whose wife is she? That was a conversation
yeah,
they'd have, right? And so they're trying to see
hundred
where
percent.
is he on the spectrum that they're used to, right?
So John Howard Yoder and N.T. Wright, scholars like this, N.T. Wright, he's very active in the Anglican Church, obviously, but he's vocationally, he's one of this generation's greatest historians. Yoder was a teacher at Notre Dame. They both came to a similar conclusion. Yoder died in like 1999 or so, and Tom Wright is still teaching and speaking and writing and researching. But their conclusion was that of all of the different groups, Jesus may very well have identified most closely with the Pharisees, even if he didn't identify himself as a Pharisee, that he would have aligned most closely with the Pharisees, which is why he reserved most of his most pointed criticism, even attacks,
Mm.
for mishpacha, like his own family. You can have we can debate that out. I'm probably not the guy. I'd point you in the direction of some of Tom Wright's works, but that's what I was saying before about Matthew 23. When you see such heated attacks coming from Jesus toward certain Pharisees, I think that's because it's the equivalent of sitting at the family table and saying, "How could you say that?
Yeah.
This is terrible what you're saying."
Okay.
So I yeah.
I think that's very interesting, and I want to then bring that into our conversation that we're having about politics and religion, right?
Yeah.
So because we're kind of getting an example from Jesus, and this isn't so for my non-Christian friends, I want to pay this off, right? So like it's one thing to kind of bend our
Yeah, yeah,
mind
yeah.
around who the Pharisees were. It's a different thing to say Jesus was interacting with them in a certain way. Is there something we can learn about it, like whether we're Christians or not, and we can see that we can go, okay, this is how I should interact in my
Mm.
culture? Is there something we can learn there?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Well, Matthew 23, I think, is the anomaly. Throughout the rest of the gospel accounts, G- there's a way that Jesus interacts with people, in particular with people who are asking a question, no matter what color the question is painted with, whether it's a question that's really a trap that they're trying to set, or a truly inquisitive question, a question that is a supplication, a question that's a challenge, a question that is coming from a place of braggadocio, whatever character it is, whatever tone it is, what is the most frequent way that Jesus answers a question? And that is with another question.
Right.
And that's very important. And it relates, even if you're not a Christian. I think this is, look at Jesus as a character from, great ancient literature that survived 2,000 years now. And there's a reason that billions of people are still reading it and taking it seriously. He answers a lot of questions with questions, perhaps most frequently answers questions with questions. And what does that do? Number one, it forces the question asker to re-examine their own assumptions, right? So even if you're looking at it as even remotely contentious, that allows the person to reverse engineer their own assumptions that led to their question in the first place, right? But what's really helpful for us in our encounters is we disassemble our own inclination toward contentiousness. And what we do by asking the person a question, I have my favorite types of questions that open up conversation the best, and that is allowing a person to tell me their own story, their own who they are, so that I can see them not as a person who's contending with me, not as one of them, somebody on the other side, but if I can ask them, oh, that's interesting. I could see you feel really strongly about that. How did you arrive at that conclusion? Did you have a mentor? Like, tell me about your mentor. Who helped you come to that conclusion? That's really interesting. So I'm allowing that person to tell me about themselves, and they're allowing me to see their humanity, not to see the punches that they're trying to throw at me, but they're giving me. I'm sort of resetting the table in a way, resetting the field, so that it's not one that we're at war with each other, but more I'm like coming alongside them and like we're actually at a bar, dude. Let's have a beer.
Okay. Yes. Okay. That's a whole nother subject. I'm convinced that every great conversation deserves a beverage, right? I should have brought a beer maybe to this, but I just think a beer or coffee or a whiskey depends on how serious it is, right? But
Yeah.
So I love that. And I think you set us up really perfectly, because now I want you to talk about how your conversation with your dad went too, because you had this long conversation with your dad. Maybe you're still having it, I don't know, about your faith. So you become a Christian, and again, I'll point people to Halfway There to hear that story, and maybe you've shared it in other places, but really interesting story how that happens. But then you have to go into a Jewish family and say, hey, look, I've become a Christian, and you get a certain reaction. But your dad has a reaction that kind of turns into this conversation that I think is really, really interesting.
So 1 month after, almost to the day after Thanksgiving, because it was right before Christmas, I get this 10-page printed out single space letter from my dad. And every paragraph was another argument as to why I must not become a Christian. And it was like, it was almost written like a business plan, because he had an objective, which is make sure his son doesn't become a Christian. And then he had all of these, tactics or arguments within, and it was emotional. It was from a filial obligation. It was historical. It was theological. It was every angle that you could think of. And what I started doing was replying to him to each paragraph, one paragraph at a time. And I was still reading pretty voraciously. So it was forcing me to draw upon a lot of the material that I had been going through that led me to the point of finally reading the New Testament, being compelled by Jesus himself, and, making that decision, with Jesus. So it forced me to answer him sometimes in somewhat of an academic way, even though I'm not an academic. I never went to college. but it was the equivalent of my academic studies. He forced me into all these studies, but it also forced us to examine what was actually non-negotiable for each of us. And fortunately for my dad, he came to the conclusion, and it wasn't a given. He came to the conclusion that his relationship with his son was more important than any of these convictions that he had arrived at, that he was expressing
What
in
were
that.
you expecting?
I knew that I was risking I don't know if I was expecting anything. I didn't want to go there.
Okay.
But I knew that I was risking the possibility, at the very least, that I would lose the approval of my father. And even as a young man in his late 20s at the time, that I didn't realize how important that was to me.
Sure.
And to him, I didn't think so far as what he actually grappled with was that he was going to sit Shiva for me, meaning going through the mourner's rituals as if I had died, which is what a lot of Orthodox Jews still do when one of their immediate family members becomes a Christian. So I realized that was a possibility. I didn't give much thought to it, but I knew that I was risking losing his approval of my life.
And instead, you got this conversation.
Yeah. So that conversation. So I would reply to him, and then he would reply to me. So we had this one thread on one paragraph going, and then I'd send another reply on a paragraph, and he'd reply to that. So we'd have all of these different threads going, and all the different things that he spurred with that initial 10-page single-spaced letter. And in some ways, that conversation, it's 25 years ago. So in some ways, that conversation is still going on. It's a lot of whiskey.
That's well, keep the industry afloat, I guess.
Yeah.
Whether it's whiskey or whatever it is, like just that So I'm convinced part of that is I got a friend who does a show about food and how that brings us together. Andrew Camp. You guys should know each other. I'll introduce you, but it's an interesting way that can happen. So that's the only reason I bring it up. But okay, so I find that really fascinating. And you've got this background. You've kind of laid this really great foundation for us. I think we can learn, because I don't think most Americans grew up this way. And maybe some do, right? And certainly not in Iowa where I grew up. So we don't always get that. And I'm not sure that it's really super common now. I think in an age of social media, there's a whole bunch of things that maybe even work against having these ideas of where let's actually have the conversation. What I'd like to do is we are going to go into. I want to start talking about your podcast. We're going to do that in just a second because your podcast is really interesting. You've had some great guests. I want to hear about that here in just a minute, friends. If you haven't yet, maybe you're listening to this conversation and you've got a question, or maybe even if it's I don't know if we're going to get into specific policies, but we might talk about how we talk about that policy, right? So if you have something specific about politics or religion, or a question about how do you engage your friends or your family members or people. And I know there's so much division out there about politics right now within families. Maybe you have an idea. Maybe you have a question or you've got some pain there. Please ask those questions and we'll get them up. In the last segment that we're going to do here in just a few minutes, we are going to ask your questions. You get a chance to be an integral part of this show, and I can't wait. Okay. So, Corey,
yes.
I want to talk about your podcast. So,
okay.
tell me about starting your show. I know you're a theater guy, right? So you have the kind of this background in that, and the performative part maybe wasn't an issue for you, but maybe that was tell me about where the idea came from for you.
So I'm sort of a theater guy. In my late teens into early 20s, I was producing theater in New York. And then when I moved out to LA, the intent was to get into independent film, which I did. So I have but I was best at producing. There were some plays that I wrote that got produced there. I was in front of the camera and on the stage as an actor here and there. But the thing I was best at was producing. So in 2000, I think it was 2018, I listened to my first podcast. I'm a Samsung, Android guy, so I didn't get on the podcast thing until pretty late in the game. But I'm telling you, man, the first podcast I ever listened to, I think it was a Mark Maron podcast.
Oh,
And my producer brain kicked in, and I absolutely fell in love with the medium. I immediately, literally before the first episode was even over, I was starting to think about stories that could be told uniquely well in this medium, as well,
yes.
and in particular, stories that could be told through conversation. Because my experience as the listener, I knew I'd become an avid podcast fan and audience, you know. But my experience as a listener is I felt like I was in the room with Maron and his Mark Maron and his guest. I wasn't, you know, in some instances like this, you get to ask questions and participate more actively. But I did feel like I was there, and I was beginning to imagine conversations like that and involving people in conversations that needed to be had in a nuanced, in-depth, meaningful, connected, intimate way. So the first podcast I produced, we're still doing. It's about the history of the coming attractions, the history of
Oh, interesting.
trailers and movie posters and stuff. It's called Trailer Geeks and Teaser Gods. That's a fun one, and we're still doing it. We're, I don't know, 6 years in, but literally by the spring of 2019, so within 6 months, we were producing our first podcast. But my intent with that one was to learn the medium, to learn everything from how to book guests to post-production, to building an audience, to recording decent sound, and everything in between. Because as a producer in the theater, it sounds like you're the boss and it sounds like all fancy and stuff. But what it really means is if like opening night, you know, there's a toilet that can't flush, you're the producer's the one who's figuring out how to do, you know, clean the toilets, you know?
Right.
So I wanted to learn everything. So by early 2020, I knew what my real passion was, what was very, very central to me. And I've been pondering on this idea about how do we do this thing better? You know, being in the church at that point already for, you know, almost 20 years, I realized that more so than any particular political issue, it was the fact that my friends from church, not only did they not know how to talk to people that were outside of a particular socio-political ecosystem, socio-political culture, subculture, they didn't even know how to talk about them with any sense of accuracy.
Yeah.
Um, which is why a lot of my friends were enamored with somebody like Sarah Palin in 2008. You know, it's because she was the attack dog. You know,
Mm-hmm.
she talked about them, those people, and it appealed to a certain mindset within the church. Meanwhile, I have this whole other life, whether it's my friends from the entertainment industry or my family who's, you know, talk about another sitcom. There, what was the Michael J. Fox sitcom from the '80s? Family
Family
Ties.
ties. Yeah.
Yeah, I was always the Alex P. Keaton in that one, and my family is all left, you know, pretty far left. So people in the church and Sarah Palin were talking about my family. They thought, but they
Right.
weren't talking about them with any sense of accuracy or any sense of love, where I had love and knowledge. So I don't know. That's why I ended up developing that idea, and we're still doing it. Our first episode was produced in October of 2020, and it was actually with my dad about
Oh,
our
wow.
experiences 20 years down the road of me becoming a Christian. And yeah, we're still doing it. I just heard this morning actually one of my top 10 guests that I wanted to have, Governor John Kasich, is coming on the show. So we've had a
Really?
whole bunch of great, you know, David Brooks and David French, Governor, my favorite governor from Jersey, Christy Todd Whitman, came on the show. So we've had some great guests along the way,
Okay. Well,
and
I'm
I've made
glad you
some
brought
great
that up
friends doing it.
because that was one of my
Yeah.
questions. So
Sorry,
you
I'm
got,
going on too long. I
no,
realize
you're not.
I'm
You're not.
yeah.
We got plenty of time. So I just,
All
I
right.
love hearing your enthusiasm because it's just fun to hear something you're super excited about. That's why I wanted to have you on. So tell me about some of these guests because I was thrilled to see David French. I thought he was a great get. I remember listening
Oh
to your
man.
episode with Bill Crystal. That was,
Yeah.
I was
Yeah,
just
that was
like,
great.
wow, that's kind of amazing. So in some ways, if I'm honest with you, you've inspired me to think, how can I have a new show or a different show like this where I can have more people on, you know, where I don't
Oh yeah.
necessarily always agree or where I'm trying to push something specific, right? Okay, so who are some of your great guests and what have you learned from them? If you're like, hey, this is a thing that I got from those conversations, even if they weren't, you know, of your same persuasion.
So it's a whole experience, there are some people like David Brooks. I think he was my number one choice, and I was so glad that he came on the show right after his latest book came out. That's How to Know a Person,
Oh yeah.
and I would say that it was one of the most meaningful conversations I've had, and he over delivered on what my expectations could have ever have been. There was a chapter in there, and I didn't know this is where it would go. There was a chapter that he wrote in that book about his friend Pete that he grew up with. Pete unfortunately grappled with mental illness and succumbed to it in early 2023, 9 months before the book came out. And I had in my notes, thank David for the chapter on Pete. Don't talk about it. And David actually practiced what much of that book is about. When I brought that up, I was ready to move on to my next question, and he goes, "Corey, that looks like that really affected you. Tell me about that." And I
Wow.
bawled my eyes out.
Yeah. Yeah.
I completely broke up. And it was just this Jedi, not a Jedi. It wasn't really I shouldn't say it was a trick. It was just David being David, that he saw my humanity, and he gave me space to share my experience, all of my experiences, and was so gracious that even though I was overflowing on the emotional side,
Yeah.
he was really gracious to allow for that in what oftentimes can be a pretty sterile setting, the interview setting.
Right.
So, but
But those
the
are
other
the
thing, and this
moments.
is,
Before you go on, I want to say those are the
yeah.
moments that make podcasting great, right?
Oh
Because
man.
one thing we don't have is time limits unless they're self-imposed, right? We don't have
Yeah.
other kinds of restrictions, and it can be informal enough where your guest can actually ask a question or send something back at you, which I think is awesome. Okay, go ahead. So other
Yeah.
guests,
Yeah.
other people that you were thinking of.
So that was the only time that happened until last week. I had a guest on, Dr. Terrence Lester, and it just hit me, man. There was a moment in his book where his friends, he experienced homelessness at a certain point in his teenage years, and one of his friends said, "We love you. You have a home here," which really echoes my experience. I'm best friends to this day with three fellas that they embraced me at a time when I was hard to embrace. Not only they, but their families, their parents,
Mm.
their siblings. Now, their families in their adult lives. So that was the second time that I had a really I was gripped emotionally.
Yeah.
But so that was really meaningful. But what's also super super meaningful are friendships that I've developed. So John Rausch, I think, has written one of the most important books of the 21st century, The Constitution of Knowledge.
Oh
I don't
wow.
know if John's going to listen to this, but if he did, he'd be like, one of. He gives me
Yeah,
crap about,
that's funny.
no, but Constitution of Knowledge, I think, really diagnoses more deeply and in more detail what ails us as a culture, the Constitution of Knowledge, but
Yeah.
it also points a way forward. And a lot of his work, the book of his that came out earlier this year, that sketches the collaboration between the I want to say the Mormon Church, but they go by a different. It's not the Mormon Church, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the LDS
Yeah.
Church
Yeah.
in Utah, and they cooperated with the LGBTQ community in Utah. So a lot of
Wow.
his latest book is about how you're able to still be who you are and true to your convictions, your theological, religious convictions, while also being able to share space with people in this pluralistic society that we have. But
Yes,
one of
dude.
the coolest things is that I'm friends with John now, that I'm friends with Pete Wehner now, that
Mm.
they've both been on my show, several times. And when I go to DC, I get to hang out with them. This is like the coolest thing ever, man.
I
Like,
love it, dude.
guys that are my intellectual heroes. Pete Wehner, like, that
Yeah.
dude is just, talk about someone to admire and who walks the walk. Like, to get to say that I get to, like, he's my pal now. Like, that is the coolest thing. I don't know. Maybe I'm just a fanboy and he's become
Yeah.
but
Well, I think that's one of the things that is great about podcasting is it can open you up to and bring you into circles that you otherwise wouldn't have been able to get into. I feel the same way about like I've met both Sky Jitani and Karen Swallow Prior in the last couple of years,
Mm,
and
yeah.
and I talked to both of them, and they both remembered being on an interview with me, and I was like, oh, that's really cool. I wouldn't say go as
That's
far
awesome.
to say we're buddies, but like they knew who I was. They weren't like, oh, some random
Well,
coming up to talk to me. So that was cool.
to your point, like get David French, like so I actually had Nancy on first. Did you read Nancy's book when it came out?
I haven't. No,
Her
I'd love to have it.
yeah, Ghosted was just so beautifully poetic, funny, raw, like just everything. I thought it was a brilliant book, so I had her on first, and then David ended up coming on. He's like, and he was so self-deprecating, like, oh man, well you had the best French, I don't know how if I could live up, But then what's cool is when he came on for the second time earlier this year, that was very affirming that at least I didn't screw it up,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
he's willing to come on a second time. And now there's some times that we get to trade notes on such certain things, but that's really cool. Like people whose work I've been admiring for years. That I don't know if Dave would consider me a friend, but like we're familiar with each other, and that's
Right.
really, and Nancy too. Like, so she's an incredibly accomplished person. Some of the
Yeah,
books that she's written, that so
I
just
love
that
that.
circle of people that I get to like spend time with, and the best ever was this guy named Eric Nevins. Like
No.
this guy's just legendary. So.
Okay. Well, thanks. That's good. I'll humbly accept the compliment. Okay.
Yeah.
So, Corey, I want to talk about. So, friends, we are going to actually take your questions here in just a moment after this next answer. So, I'll save a little bit of space for that. So, make sure if you're watching that you ask some questions. Okay, I've got a couple. I'd love to have a couple more. So, if you got a question about how you relate to family or what we can learn about talking politics without maybe making it contentious, whatever, I don't know what it is, you guys bring it and we'll ask it. Okay. But I wanted to ask you, Corey, about, because I've seen some of your videos on TikTok, and some of them I'm going to call it a rant. Hopefully you won't mind that, but kind of a rant about how we talk to people on the other side. And I thought this was
Yeah.
such an important point that I wanted to make sure I asked you about it. Because there's something seems to be wrong with our language. Like we're always using war language, we're using enemy language, we're using these kinds of things that really up the stakes. There's a book that was kind of about that. I'll have to find it to mention it. Jonah Goldberg wrote one about that.
Yeah.
So, what's wrong with some of our language, and then like what do you try to stay away from? What do you try to use instead? And then how can we change it? What do you do so that we can change it a little bit?
I think the biggest shift that a lot of us can make is to not participate in everything being a war, everything being a contest, everything being a battle. Anyone who's outside of our particular orthodoxy as the other, as an enemy, as the other side. Well, they this and they that. So, because those circles can become increasingly tight, increasingly small, to where you're the only one standing in that circle. I noticed it this weekend where, well, I've noticed it over at least the last 25 years, where a lot of folks in my church assumed that I was, as I would put it, a dyed-in-the-wool Democrat, which I'm actually not. Not that they're like, if I was, my family is, but like I'm not. If I was, I wouldn't back away from it. I wouldn't want to apologize for it. It is what it is.
Little Seinfeld
Not
reference.
that there's anything wrong with that. That's right. But a lot of my friends from church just assumed I was because I didn't hate Democrats enough. That's really what it came down to.
Yeah.
That was a defining principle of being a conservative to a lot of folks. That my kids were going. My kids went to a Christian school. We were going to this Grace Baptist here in Santa Clarita. So without realizing it, to them, conservatism meant, having a sufficient level of hatred and animus for people that were not, whatever it might have been, Rush Limbaugh, like, I don't know, to everybody, it's arbitrary. So, and it changes, it's changed along the way. Now it's anybody who is not, a red hat wearing MAGA. And again, I have dear friends that I grew up with that go to the rallies and wear the hats, and they think
Dude,
that,
but here's the problem. I went to a concert this weekend and I wore my red Cardinals hat and I thought twice about it. You know what I mean? Like I went,
yeah, that's
because
bad.
I'm seeing videos of people getting beat up for wearing a MAGA hat. It doesn't. It says MLB. I finally decided. Well, on the back, it's got the MLB logo, so people won't just.
But
do that.
Here's
But I
the
have
other
to think
thing
about it, and that's not right in America.
So here's the other thing. A lot of folks might see me being critical. I'm very critical of Donald Trump. So it's another reason why a lot of my friends from church think I'm a liberal. I'm critical of Donald Trump actually because I'm a Christian. I'm critical of Donald Trump because I'm a conservative, and that's kind of a weird conundrum for a lot of folks to think through. And that's maybe for another episode that we can tease that out a little bit. But the thing is, so I talked about why I'm against California's response to Texas's redistricting. Why I'm against that is because I'm a conservative, because I think that the independent commission that California came up with is a renovation to democracy that is a step in the right direction. Not perfect, but a step in the right direction. And the fact that I wasn't on the whatever it might have been. So a lot of folks got their heads around, a lot of folks on the left or even left of center got their heads around, this is all out political war. So yes, it's anti-democratic what Newsom is doing, especially mid-decade redistricting, especially the gerrymandering. And we understand that votes are going to, moderate votes and right of center votes are going to be diluted based on this redistricting, but it's all out war. And this is what we have to do in an all out political war. I disagree with that. I don't think that the response. So, but anyway, not to justify that's a whole other conversation too. But the fact that I expressed the fact that if this comes up for a vote, I'm going to vote against it. My friends on the left thought I was an absolute, that I'm the reason that we're going to fascism. I'm the reason that this country is going to crap. I'm the reason, I'm the cause of the end of democracy as we know it. Because I have a different, I'm 1 degree outside of this orthodoxy that this is what you need to believe and this is how you need to think and this is what you need to say and this is how you need to vote. And if you're 1 degree outside of that, you're just not in the club anymore, and therefore you are an enemy. You are the problem. So I just think this way of thinking isn't how we live among each other, isn't how we do this democracy thing. There are much bigger fights than the redistricting thing. The founding fathers fought the slavery for 80 years before Abe Lincoln. Even in Abe Lincoln's own term, it's not like he was inaugurated and the next day they passed the amendment to end slavery. It took him years to get to that point. So we've had much bigger fights within our pluralistic democratic republic. So we just need to think straight. We need to think a little more accurately, I should say. That's just shift our warlike mentality to, okay, this is a human being. This is my neighbor. This is my loved one. This is my family member. This is my Bible study mate. This is a fellow I'm having a beer with at the bar, whatever it is. We need to shift our thinking from this is my enemy that I'm going to rhetorically punch until I feel indulged to this is my neighbor that I'm going to have a conversation with.
Yes. And I think that that's something I'd love to see Christians be part of. Even though, again, the show isn't explicitly Christian, but I'd love to see us take a different tack so that we are part of the solution, not really part of the problem. That's not exactly happening right now. That's okay. Or is what it is, I guess. Thank you for that. I think that's really, really powerful. I'd love to see us get to a place where we can allow people to have their opinions and discuss them without killing each other, as you have said. Here's what I want to do. I want to get to questions. Okay. So we've got a few questions, guys. I understand. Maybe you're just avoiding politics and religion, or maybe you don't want to, but we do have a couple of questions. And so I'm going to go to that now. Let's go into this, and I'm going to put it up here, and I'm going to have to adjust it maybe a little bit, but the first one, let's see what we should ask. I think this is a great one here. Let me see if I can add that up here. Now I'm going to put this up. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. So You probably can't see it. Can you see it?
No, I can't see it.
You can't see it at all, which means I have to say it. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So James asks, how do you learn the skill of answering a question with a question? What's a trick you'd teach him?
Why is that important to you, James?
Because you said earlier Jesus did it. So that's what he's like.
No. I just answered a question with a question.
I see what you did.
No.
I missed it. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah,
I missed an opportunity there.
It's interesting. It is a shift. Like it's a mindset shift. It's a dispositional shift. I will give you a couple of tools. I mentioned one. David Brooks's most recent book came out at the end of 2023. How to Know a Person is a really good. It'll offer you a lot of practical, usable tools. The other one that's really helpful is Monty Guzman's. I think hers came out at the end of 2022. It's called I Never Thought of It That Way. And the title itself is the first tool. That's interesting. I never thought of it that way. So if you enter into a conversation and you sort of like, I find myself now when I know I'm sitting down with somebody who has different views than I do, say somebody who voted for Trump, for example, what I'm rehearsing on the way to that conversation, a lot of times we're rehearsing in our heads certain talking points that our favorite pundit just, said that day. And we're rehearsing that. We're rehearsing certain comebacks because we know he feels this way and I'm going to come back that way. What I'm rehearsing is I'm practicing the right disposition. The right disposition, as Monica Guzman's book indicates, I never thought of it that way. I'm practicing the disposition that will leave the best possibility for either one of us, but I'm the one I have a little bit more control over to arrive at that moment where I say, I never thought of it that way. I want to, with every question that they ask, because let's face it, some questions aren't questions, they're interrogations. So if I can turn that interrogation, a question's being asked to get you to the point where they can turn it around on you and catch you, right? A lot of the questions in these types of conversations go that way. So if I can redefine the entire playing field, redefine the entire kind of ethos that we're within, to where I really genuinely want to learn about this human being that I'm sharing space with. This human being, if it's a family member that I love, if it's a person I've been going to church with for a decade plus, if it's, whoever it is, even if it's just somebody that I share the same zip code with, we share something. And if I can give that person even one degree of what God gives us to see the spark, to see the divine in that person as a human being, to see them as a unique human being, not as some proxy for one of them, but as a unique human being. And then I can learn about them and their story and then arrive at that point where, that makes, I still disagree, but like, I see how you got there. I never thought of it that way.
Right.
So does that help?
Yes. So what I hear you saying is, hey, don't take it personally. And then so this is a posture. It's a mindset. Instead of acting like it's an interrogation, don't take it personally. And exactly what you did, James, why is that so important to you? Right. You let the focus not be about you, but let it be about him as the question asker.
Yeah.
And so then, and that's the posture. That's the posture right there. Okay, I got two more, and then we gotta wrap up. We got this is Lisa, and she says, "Thank you for a moderate, sane approach to talking politics," which I think is what you're trying to do. I have family members who I don't want to talk politics because anything outside of their beliefs is considered offensive, right?
Yeah,
and that can be just really, really painful. I think that's been the case for a lot of people, particularly since 2020. For folks, it's just kind of hard, and I've seen that for sure. And so James follows this up and he says, what about talking to a family member who has distanced themselves from from the family, presumably because of the politics? So how would you recommend to somebody going through that? Because I think there's so many of us doing that, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah. So one is, first way, it's a hard way, and that is to reckon with my culpability in the reasons that this person distanced themselves or at the very least, doesn't want to talk about politics. And I'll give you one example. I am not a vaccine skeptic. I was at one time, but I'm not now. But one of my kids, I have 3 kids. The middle one, he was skeptical because of how quickly the vaccines for COVID-19 were rushed through the system. So his initial position was, I don't want to be a science experiment. When he said that, a lot of the folks in our family and extended family just pounced on him, including me. And that was one of the things that got him to dig his heels in that much more and distance himself and not want to talk about any of this stuff. And months later, I think it was the fall of 2021, was it fall of whenever the vaccines were finally coming out and got FDA approval, I revisited the conversation with him, and I was practicing, especially because it's my kid. He's 22 now, so he was 20, maybe 18, 19 at the time. I practiced that disposition of just listen. And I had to kind of reel him in a couple times where I just said, Jack, listen, I just want to understand better where you're coming from. And he explained to me how he felt attacked and belittled and made to feel stupid and made to feel bad, you know, that he was the problem. He's the grandma's going to die or whatever, you know, and I understood it. And no, I didn't change his mind. I understood him better. I understood where he was coming from better. And at least we can now have not extensive conversation, but he trusts me enough that I'm not going to attack him for expressing something that is different than me. He's not going to be made to feel like an apostate for having something 1 degree outside of the acceptable point of view. So our tendencies, the best thing that we can do is to check our own tendencies to keep everyone perfectly orthodox to what we think is necessary for the future of the universe. You know?
Right. Yeah. Man, I love that. All right. I just want to put one last thing up here and then we'll wrap up. This is Lisa again. She said that's a good skill for relationships in general, right? Not just political conversations.
Yeah.
Like listening to others and letting them be even the focus of attention. I think that is correct. All right. Corey, we can find you. Your website is politicsandreligion.us. Is that correct?
Yeah.
That's where you go.
Politicsandreligion.us. Yeah.
.us. There you go. Oh, that's perfect. I like how that's good. And then you can find same Politics and Religion if you search on YouTube. I will link all of that up as well, and I'll toss it in the notes or in the comments of this video so people can find it there as well. I'm going to give you the last word.
Eric, can I say just one more thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. The one last thing I'll say is give yourself grace. If you want to enter into these conversations and you want to repair some relationships, continue some relationships that are on thin ice, give yourself grace, because I'm telling you right now, I am not the expert. I am at best, I'm hitting 300, which means I'm failing 7 out of 10 times.
Right.
But if I give myself a little bit of grace, I can at least come back again and try to learn from how I failed a vast majority of the time and try to do it a little bit better in the next conversation. So give yourself a little bit of grace.
Dude, I love that. Corey, thanks so much for being here. Friends, you can find out everything about the podcast. It's going to be out there. I'll let you know when it shows up. If you go to ericnevins.com. And again, you can find Corey at politicsandreligion.us. I love that. I hope that you will have a conversation. I hope this conversation inspired your conversations, that you'll have a conversation with somebody you love, somebody you care about, or maybe just a random stranger. Give them a little bit of grace, give yourself a little bit of grace, and find that place of mutual understanding. That's what our culture needs. It's what everybody needs. And I think you'll enjoy it if you do, and it'll be good for you. And maybe ultimately, I think what Corey say for the whole future of the universe, right? I think maybe that's not even so far off as you think. Corey, thanks for being here. Appreciate it. You guys have a great day. We'll see you.